Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I am excited and ecstatic to sit here to be talking with Eric Rhodes. He is a NFT artist OG, came around in 2019. And right before this conversation, we were talking about how artists in the historical NFT space and also just the overall NFT space, the artists are really underappreciated. So I'm trying to take a little bit of a more direct approach to cataloging all of the artists on the podcast, because there's so much history, and a lot of these artists actually participated in these historical NFT collections, which we've been talking about on the show for the past year now. Eric has a ton of history. I could probably sit here and name off all of his accolades and adventures for the next hour, but we'll do that throughout the rest of this podcast. So Eric, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm super stoked. I actually had Eric written down on my list of artists to approach, and I'm glad we got to do this much earlier than expected. Eric, so I didn't want to butcher everything that you've done, and I'm gonna share the screen here in a second to show literally the long list of everything you've done. Just tell everybody who Eric Rhodes is and how you found your way into NFTs, because as you mentioned when we were right before we started recording, you kind of fell into that world of NFTs.
Yeah, who Eric is more philosophical question. But let's, I think for NFTs, the NFT space, I actually started out as an anonymous creator in the space under the pseudonym Second Realm. And that was really, it was just a safe space for me to create. And then I became pseudonymous because I wanted people to know, like I got more comfortable with Eric, the artist himself. And I wanted people to know that there was a human behind it. So started introducing my face, my voice, all of those kinds of things. And really at the end of 2021, I made the decision to evolve from Second Realm, which is now actually the name of my studio. It's the business that I run all of my art through. And I am in the space as Eric Rhodes. I am a founder of both, I'm a pioneer of the trash art movement. If you don't know what that is, we could talk a little bit more about that. I am one of the people who pushed the idea of remix culture long before the PFP market ever embraced it, which is, one of the greatest things that I've seen come about. And there's so much more. Let's see. Oh, we've got stuff on the screen here. It's on my left. Yeah. I was an award winner for the 2020 NFT Awards, which was really interesting. It was a People's Choice Award, so the community voted me and 4 others as winners of the inaugural People's Choice Award for NFTs. And I was shortlisted there for the most innovative NFT. Originally in the space, there was this meme called, it was a meme based on a project that I created called the People's Potato. And it's a fungible, non-fungible token. So I minted 1 billion of them. Really, they're semi-fungible tokens, but that's sort of a technical whatever. Most people don't care about that.
Unless you're in the historical NFT community, then it's a topic of conversation every day, right, and pounded into the ground.
It's a good point. That's a good point. So yeah, I've been involved in quite a few things, experimenting in the space. The People's Potato ended up sort of turning into a project called Tater Tech, which was my token, my social token. And I was experimenting with this idea of social liquidity mining, which was you earn tokens by giving away the potato, which today you see it a little bit differently. There's liquidity mining where you earn tokens by holding on to an asset. So I was sort of experimenting with this, a different sort of paradigm at the time. So I've tried a few things. Yeah, I've been in the space since I found it in late 2018. And I really started participating in mid 2019 when I felt like I grasped what crypto art even was. There's just been, I often describe it as sort of Alice, like Alice in Wonderland, a sort of jumped into this rabbit hole chasing after something, and I haven't gone out of it. Haven't come out of it since.
Nobody ever leaves the crypto space.
There's no reason to.
There's no reason, dude, right? It's the rabbit hole just gets deeper and deeper with more doors that open, the deeper that you go. I have to love it.
It's true.
At the end, I have to mention this for those that are listening. For under Eric's crypto and NFT career highlights, the very end says male NFT thirst trap provocateur. What the hell is that?
Yeah. So there is a crypto influencer. Her name is Crypto Finally. Some people might know her. An article was written about her after she launched some NFT thirst traps. These thirst traps were anything but a thirst trap. They were her almost fully clothed. Maybe the only skin that was showing was her face, her hands, and the bottom of her legs, right? No cleavage, none of that stuff. And I believe it was, it wasn't Cointelegraph, it was CoinDesk that wrote, someone from CoinDesk wrote this article that was denigrating her, basically calling her a tramp and a slut in so many words, and shaming her for creating these thirst traps. And so what I did was I minted my own thirst trap in support of her, except I showed full chest and full titties, right? Way more skin than she was showing. And I was wearing a towel, and you could see the imprint of my dick in the towel. And it's like I was the point was, and I knew this was going to happen, two things were going to happen. I was going to be praised for supporting her, which is fucking mind-blowing. And then the other was nobody was going to even pick up on the fact that I was showing more skin, and probably showing, and definitely showing more than she was showing in terms of what thirst trap might look like. Now, I'm a thicker dude, so I guess I don't really fall into the thirst trap aesthetic, but an article got written about me, a lot of money. Another artist in the space, he's no longer with us, but he also did his own thirst trap. Bishop, JFC Bishop, he did his. And then there was a couple of others. And we were praised for supporting Rachel in her quest to sort of not earn her name back, but like just point out how fucked up it is that women get denigrated and condemned for things like this, and yet I come in, a dude with and I'll say this with confidence because I'm a bigger dude with bigger titties than she was showing at and here I was being praised. It was
it's unfortunate that the double standard in society still exists. I'm very familiar.
That's correct.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with what you're talking about, because I worked on the Las Vegas Strip for 10 years and in the nightclub industry for 5. And the double standards of the things that the women have to go through, and on the Strip in Las Vegas in the clubs, you'll get women wearing almost nothing, but they're forced to for their job, and then they still get denigrated for what they're wearing, even though it's a part of their work attire, and it's also sexually alluding to increase sales. So it's it's quite a situation that the women get confided into, even though they're kind of forced to sometimes. So with this then, with the thirst trap provocateur, was there any sort of movement that spawned from this, or was there a one-off situation?
Yeah, it was a little movement, like, and that's what I was alluding to before. After I did this, several other creators and artists came out in support of her and minted their own thirst traps. And then we started getting some coverage as a result of it. And I think it just highlighted what we already knew, which was there is this double standard, and there is this, like I said, I was being supported. I was being supported and praised for showing way more skin than her. And it was just like, and I would call people out And I would say this is, I understand, I appreciate that you're reaching out to me and like praising me, but don't you see, like I was trying to like highlight just what she was going through. And we talked on the back end a little bit, and she's thanked me a couple times for just, I think it was at a time that was really messing with her because, this is her brand, right? She is a crypto influencer, and something like this in an industry newspaper or industry, well, this is how you know I'm old, called something a newspaper, an industry website, could affect her follower, right? Her followers and her brand. So I just thought it was unfair.
Completely agree. It's interesting how the proliferation of NFTs has just completely flipped that double standard on its head. And now we see simp culture has kind of taken over, and you see a lot of the OnlyFans creators. Now they have the ability to show skin and profit off of it without receiving ridicule. So within the matter of 2 to 3 years, that whole situation is completely 180'd.
Yeah, and there are platforms that cater to sex workers in the NFT space, and not that, I want to be clear, not that Rachel is a sex worker, she's not, but this sort of falls into that category as well. This discussion falls into the category of, especially when we're talking about the Vegas Strip, things of that nature. But there are NFT platforms now that cater to sex workers and people of that nature, yet they will go and will take advantage of these women as well. And it's really difficult, especially in I would say a prudish culture here in the United States, where sexes and sexuality are things that we sort of push down and push away and are made to feel shame about. Something I've personally been working through with I have a sex therapist, and I've been on top of my traditional therapist, and I've been working through my own insecurities about sex and kink and sexuality. And I'm a dude, right? So this is easier for me. For women, it's because of the way the culture is, it's harder, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that's definitely something, a topic that I want to dive into a little bit later. But I do want to go back to the beginning, talk a little bit about trash art, right? You mentioned that you were one of the pioneers. I know maybe that's the idea that you helped bring trash art to the mainstream. I know Rob Ness and Max Osiris and a few others started that movement, or were kind of in the very beginning around 2016. Can you just tell us a little bit about the beginning of trash art? So who were some of the early pioneers, and then where did you leave your mark within that movement?
Sure. Yeah. So really, trash art started in 2020 with Rob Ness. So Rob Ness and Max were on Super Rare at the time, and there was a growing culture of what collectors were considering to be sort of what was good art, and in response to that, so good art for these whale collectors might have been like these 3D animated sculptures that had movement and looked like it took a lot of time, and effort equaled more value, right? And so, as we know throughout history, that could be nothing could be further from the case. All we have to do is look at Duchamp, right, and his fountain, which was, basically a urinal turned upside down, and it was a sculpture that he put into a gallery, changing its context, right? There was that didn't take any effort other than getting the urinal and turning it upside down and naming it. So there was this challenge, and we see on the screen here, there's Rob Ness's 64-gallon toter. He was kicked off the platform for minting this particular piece of artwork because they believed it violated copyright. And by that, I mean Super Rare leadership and the whales that were on Super Rare at the time. They believed it reduced the value of what they considered to be good art. And as a result, um, a groundswell of support for Robness and then ultimately Max for getting kicked off the platform because they didn't create the kind of art that the collectors and the leadership thought that they would want on the platform, right? And it was really fortuitous, I think, for us as creators because we saw an opportunity to support these two artists, and there were people in the community. We didn't call it trash art. It was just art, and we didn't see any different. Appropriation art has existed for a long period of time, and basically, that particular image that Rob created was appropriation art. It was taken from an image on Home Depot website, and it was moshed in a product called Photo Mosh. I think one click, and they created that in that loop. And yeah, and then so they get kicked off, right? And I think as Jimmy wrote a blog post at this time, either on Twitter or in something called Scent, which was this small community of NFT creators, and it was sort of like blogging for the crypto art space, and he called these artists that were creating these low effort artworks trash. And so we, as a community, just started to own. We decided together, me, Robness, Jay DeLay, all these other early, Crypto Una, all these early trash artists to embrace the term trash art. In the same way that surrealists embrace the term surrealist, in the same way that impressionists embraced the term impressionist, which were all used at the time to denigrate the artists that were creating the work. So in true fashion, the art community, the artists came together, and my involvement was from the very, sort of within weeks of this happening, of Rob getting kicked off. Within maybe a week after Rob getting kicked off, sort of just jumping on board with this community of finding this community of artists and creators. And we have been pushing. It was a movement at the time to fight against both gatekeeping, which was this idea like we should, collectors shouldn't be able to decide what is and isn't good art and how it should be on this platform, right? Like you shouldn't be able to get kicked off as super rare just because you made art that somebody doesn't like. Like who the fuck do these people think they are? So that's sort of where it all began for me.
Interesting. And I want to read this from an article of NFTs.WTF for those that are listening. Artist and trash art historian Eric Paul Rhodes has been one of the most prominent figures in documenting this evolution. He brings historical examples to demonstrate how trash art is a continuation of the ongoing revolutionary debates on what is art. We took to the term and owned it, just like Impressionism was taken from Impressionists, despite it being a derogatory reference by a critic, he explains, and goes on a little bit more. So I mentioned earlier, Rob and Max, they were in Rare Pepes and they were creating art before trash art, but this was part of the reason why it became trash art, because it's the super rare platform and foundation. They wanted the art to mimic more of traditional art, where in realism or realistically, it was more mimicking crypto art, which you're trying to do, which everyone in the community wanted it to be all one thing, right? You want it to just be art or digital art, but they had a completely different idea from there. It's quite interesting because there's something similar. I'm gonna kind of pivot this a little bit. There's something quite similar happening in the historical NFT community on this idea of like, what's a collection, what's not a collection, what is a token, what isn't a token. And it's caused this like huge divide within the community where right now, one of the hot debates and topics is that collections can only be enforced from a smart contract where so if you go back to Namecoin, which was created in 2011, you have a bunch of artists who were creating, or they were taking early examples of puny codes, which represents art, And 3,000, there's 3,000 different pieces of this collection, quote unquote collection, that were created by a few hundred different artists. And then archaeologists came back in. They found that there was a lot of these similar tokens created by individual artists. And so they curated a collection. And then there's other people who say that this is not a collection because there was no intentionality behind it. Although there's token intentionality, but not intentionality to curate a collection in the beginning. And then you move to Counterparty, and you see these similar ideas with Rare Pepes and Spells of Genesis, where there's a collection intentionality, or there was a group intentionality to create a collection. And then you go to Ethereum, where then you have the smart contract who kind of enforces that as kind of the caretaker. So what you were saying, that's more of like a gatekeeping on a historical thesis or philosophy. Mm-hmm. Here, it's kind of similar, right? It's like an art philosophy where they want to gatekeep it. So I want to hear your thoughts kind of on that, because there's some similarities to that.
Yeah, right. It's human nature to want to define and put things into categories, and then we argue about the semantics of those categories. We've seen this throughout history. I believe it seems to me that it always comes down to, well, the argument is divided on those who don't want a term to impact the value of something that they currently own, right? They didn't want Rob's Mosh Toter to be considered art because in their mind, it devalued the art that they had already collected on Super Rare. You have to remember that at the time, Super Rare was considered to be the most prestigious platform to be on. There was no Nifty Gateway. There was no boutique, Tyler Hobbs and all these other creators, these boutique collections, high-end boutique collections, none of that existed. So you had Super Rare, which was top of the pyramid. You had Maker's Place and Known Origin, which, I think that they considered themselves to be super rare, but they weren't, at least in the conceptually throughout the community. And then you had Rarible, which was sort of like bottom of the barrel at the time. Rarible was persona non grata in terms of platforms because it was a haven for scammy stuff. And this is, something to consider here. I'm talking about 2019 to 2020, right? There's no apes. There is no PFP community. PFP is not, as we use it today, is not in the lexicon, right? It's not as commonplace in the lexicon of the crypto art NFT space. And so the prestige was centered on who was curating the art at that time, not what the product was, essentially. And if you were on Super Rare and you got on early enough and lucky enough, that gave you this sort of halo effect, right? And this halo effect was, oh, you must be somebody because, Super Rare is the Gagosian gallery of the NFT space, right? Of the crypto art space. It's the most premier. And then later Nifty Gateway comes and, shits all over their what Nifty Gateway ended up doing was just having a much better marketing model with money behind it, and they did it really well and sort of introduced people to the community. And then we sort of lift off from there in late November. And then some early January, was it January? I don't know. Early 2021, we see, $1 million offers on CryptoPunks. And that's where the historical value conversation starts to begin, which evolves into the historical art, the historical NFT community, right? That evolves into that. And then we see people coming into the space and we start to see the $69 million sale, which evolves into Christie's and Sotheby's getting involved into the space. And then April comes about and we see Bored Apes, which adds this new paradigm. And then Bored Apes comes in and adds this new way of introducing entire collections by developing a community behind it and getting people excited about it. And then the whole PFP evolution begins at that point. So like these three forks started to really evolve, and was originally all centered around this idea of just a group of artists coming together and sort of in this dark corner of the web, sharing their art and doing, doing it. How would I usually say, sharing art, digital art at scale in a marketplace, and it's evolved from there because we've moved into high digital art, where you see Xcopy and Ferocious and Beeple and Trevor Jones and Matt Cain, all these really fantastic artists selling for high amounts. I remember when Xcopy was getting excited about $5 sales. I remember when Rob Ness at the time purchased the highest, made the highest sale on Super in NFTs, which was $1,000. Like, it was not about the money at the time. It was sort of just proving that crypto art can be something we do at scale. And here it is. Here we are.
Here we absolutely really are. There's so many different markets from it, right? And now that's proliferating into gaming NFTs and metaverse, and it's just going to keep, it's just going to music, and it's just going to keep growing and growing. But purely at its foundation, NFTs began as domains. Vitalik quotes in the Ethereum white paper that namecoin assets are non-fungible assets, right? That's just like the early attempt at domain, similar to ENS. Then you go over to Counterparty, and some parts of Doge Party, spells of Genesis. And then Rare Pepe is kind of like the big canary in the coal mine, grouped in over its history of two and a half years. You got a little over 300 different artists contributing to the project, and then some of them going on and spurring off and having their own individual careers. And then on the other side, in the early side of Ethereum, you actually have Xcopy who submitted artwork to get into Curio Cards, which is considered the first art collection, and was rejected, right? So there's all these weird attempts of now these very known artists trying different ways to get their artwork out there, whether it's in a collection, one of one, collaborations, trash art, and now a lot of those have spun off to become their own industries. It's crazy how a lot of that's formed.
Yeah, and that's just the nature of the nature of building on your popularity in your business. Xcopy is super fortunate. He created really, for me, it wasn't pleasing. It's just why I didn't collect any of his work, and I don't regret it. I bought things that I liked, but I always admired his output ability, and always admired that he stuck with his aesthetic. And you'll see their derivatives of his aesthetic now. I think, what's the, I'm going to butcher it right now.
I think you have OSF who does something very similar to what he does.
Rex guy, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So exactly, right? And something to consider here was there were artists before the PFP collections came about who were doing Basquiat derivatives and getting shit on. How dare you steal, that's Basquiat style, this and that. And now we're seeing derivatives as part of the marketplace, accepted as part of the marketplace. And that wasn't the case. There was so much talk at the time about originality and what is art and low effort versus high effort. And that's gone out the window from a lot of collectors, at least the public discussion from collectors. You're looking at some of my early art here.
Yep.
I was into some. Yeah,
who is this individual for those that are?
Yeah.
Tell us who this individual is. He's in 3 of these pieces of art already.
So if you're into chain link, then you know Sergey, right? That's how I found NFTs. I had been collecting or investing in Bitcoin and Ethereum since I think 2017 was when I decided to finally jump in. But I'd known about it since like 2012, and I was like, this is internet funny money. 2012, I was still figuring out what I wanted to do with life. So this is internet funny money. I'm not going to spend my money on this. 2017, there's now I see value in a marketplace, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start investing. And I start to learn about other altcoins. And what I liked about Chainlink was they were really focused on the Oracle aspect of on becoming a decentralized Oracle. And so I saw value in that, and I became a Link Marine, which is sort of like the mimetic name that the community gave itself. I was pre-mainnet, right, like stuff like that. And so when I came into the NFT space, Ethereum memes. So I decided to do Chainlink memes, and I was only minting on Super Rare at the time. I got lucky enough to get on Super Rare, and I always say this: I was lucky enough to get on Super Rare not because of my art, but I believe because of where I worked at the time, which was Twitter.
You worked at Twitter?
I did work at Twitter. Yeah, I worked there for 2 years, I think. And so I was lucky enough to get on the platform, but I was doing these Chainlink memes, get your ducks in a row, was it 1,000 by the end of year, all this kind of stuff, and playing with the idea of the Oracle Overlord and sort of the Oracle, just playing with the memetics of it all. It was my first sort of experiments in GIF art that I was willing to sell. I'm not, if I could go back and buy all of these pieces and then burn them, I probably would. I don't think they're very impressive. They were really effortful in terms of what like messages I was attempting to get across, especially my political stuff. But
it shows the progress of your artistic history, which is cool. And I also do want to mention, it's funny for those that weren't around, 1,000 end of the year that's behind Sergey and two of his artworks was an actual meme. And Link was like the biggest winner of last bull market. So Link went from, I think, 20 cents to, I don't know, $40, $100, something like that. And it was by far the biggest winner of the last bull market or bear market. I mean, and it
allowed me, like, because I'd gotten in so early, it allowed me to, after leaving Twitter, I basically lived on Link until my art started taking off. Like, how fortunate, so I feel grateful for the opportunity to like be here today, 3 years later, 3.5 years later, all because I invested in some meme coin,
one of the original ones. So since you worked, since you worked at Twitter, and Twitter is heavily tied to crypto since its beginning, right? Hal Finney posted running Bitcoin back in 2009 on Twitter, and it's become the dominant communication platform for everything crypto Twitter, not just NFTs and DeFi, but pretty much everything. Working there for 2 years, do you feel like it gave you any leverage or insight to how to operate on crypto Twitter, or just how to be an effective marketer through this social media channel?
No, not specifically. So I have my career, I have a career in marketing, and then customer experience design, and service design. So those specific aspects are what gave me, I think, sort of a leg up on building a community, on knowing sort of what works and what doesn't work, from a general marketing perspective. What I did at Twitter was I was brought in to do some change management and lead a service design program for the team, the global team that basically takes in your reports for things like I'm being bullied, and other, like there's AI work. So if there's beheadings on a platform, that gets put into a queue and then people look through it. So like everything from being bullied to my passwords changed to I've lost my account, all that stuff. I was doing a lot of internal work working with the teams to change the way that they communicated with customers. What it did do was give me insight into how, oh, you know what? I lied before. It gave me insight into how the algorithms actually work. Now, I didn't do work with their algorithms, but our teams were heavily influenced by them. So whether you're being sandboxed or put in a timeout or shadow banned, which they don't shadow ban because they don't use the term shadow ban. But yes, it's been my experience that the algorithm does push certain topics and people down, which I would consider shadow banning, but that's been my understanding.
Shadow ban is a real pain. And so I have Eric's Twitter account open up, 13,000 followers, 5,000 following, good ratio.
I started with 81 followers.
Really? When you started your NFT movement or the NFT career?
Yeah. And those 81 followers were mostly Chainlink people because that's where I was sort of messing around. I was trying to get like an understanding in the community. And that's when I was anonymous and under the Second Realm, pseudonym or, the anonymous name of Second Realm.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to move on to your next project. On your Twitter account, showed a synthesis avatars, but there's something that came before that, and it's called alt punks. We mentioned we mentioned there's you mentioned the proliferation of various derivative works, whether it was from the Basquiats in the early to appropriation art, where you're just taking images from websites and then remixing them or putting it into some sort of like creative platform to change it. CryptoPunk derivatives is by far the most popular derivative out there. You could even say Rare Pepes were the original derivatives because they're taking derivatives of all kinds of different traditional artwork or artwork and images and everything like that. But really what got the derivative mark going was definitely punks. Here you mentioned that in February 2021, right here, this is probably one of the earliest ones. Pride Punks were the first CryptoPunk derivative that was in 2018, which became revived recently. They only had 2 original tokens. Here you minted, I believe 100 is what it says here. 100 or 99 items, 145 volume. And these are all unique ones. You have Biohazard Punk, Vincent Van Gogh Punk, Chipper Jones Punk. So you could tell these weren't your typical generative 10K CryptoPunk derivative. You definitely put some effort into this. What inspired you to do a CryptoPunks derivative, and were you aware of any other ones prior to creating this?
Yeah, so certainly derivatives of CryptoPunks started almost immediately after CryptoPunks. There was CryptoPunk painter who was doing physical paintings of CryptoPunks, and that's the earliest known derivative. I wrote a little article called "The Short History of Alt Punks," which includes there it is, which includes sort of a timeline of some of the earliest CryptoPunk derivatives. Where I delineate is the difference between derivatives and alt punks. Alt punks is a movement, which was also a derivative. My inspiration for creating my first one was simply, I saw, I didn't realize how much he influenced my path, but a lot of money. He made his own CryptoPunk, and at the time, I wasn't willing to spend maybe I don't even know what they were, maybe an ETH, who knows, or 2 ETH or whatever for a floor one. I don't really remember. and I wasn't willing to spend that on a CryptoPunk, so I decided to create my own sort of derivative version. And then that seemed to give other artists permission to use the 8-bit aesthetic to start creating their own derivative collections. Now you'll see those Began Punks, which he created a derivative collection before the Unofficial Punks. It didn't grow in popularity yet. It's sort of a lot of the earlier derivatives that were put on chain became popular after I created Unofficial Punks, and this organic community of 150 different artists and collections grew around it. And something to consider is that at the time I was being called a scammer, a money grabber, how dare I steal the punk aesthetic. And really, for me, it was just about celebrating the CryptoPunks, because I didn't want they were too expensive for me, and I didn't want to like buying into it was sort of out of reach. So I decided I'm going to make my own. Like, what better way to celebrate it but then by making an homage? What most people don't know is that on OpenSea, my collection almost was going to be banned because they were seeing it as a scam. And I was having conversations with OpenSea, Matt and John, with Matt and John of Larva Labs through OpenSea. And they essentially approved this collection because it was an homage to the CryptoPunks. And that was all it was ever intended to be. Yet the community came down hard on me. And now we see a completely different way in which the community interacts with derivatives. And I really think it evolved as the apes. So I launched this in February of 21. There's no apes, there's no new doodles, there's no fame ladies, there's no world of women. None of this exists, right? You have basically 2 to 3 known PFP projects, Avastars, Unofficial Punks, and maybe Crypto Skulls to me. Right. There were others, certainly. But those were sort of what I was aware of at the time. And so this, PFP marketplace didn't exist. And we're over here, hundreds of artists are now creating derivatives, and it's being proliferated across Twitter. To talk about the influence of Twitter here, that really helped shine a light on just how important having a profile picture you're proud of and can flex on became a part of your social identity. And so now we're seeing April comes about, and then we start to see a little shift towards the community begins to shift towards this acceptance of derivatives as part of the actual market itself. You start to see CryptoPunks buying derivatives of their CryptoPunks. I think then you start to see ape owners like going ape over like derivatives, like caked apes. They want a derivative of their ape, like it's really interesting the way to see the market shift. And I think that was influenced by the work that we all did organically. There was no intention here to create a movement. There was no intention here to money grab. There was no intention here other than to celebrate and be a participant in like the growing popularity of the CryptoPunks. A lot of us were priced out, a lot, and this is what the reason was for like this community growing.
So here, let me ask you this then, and there's it's kind of a gray area. So the term PFP is obviously a narrative that was curated later down the road. Yes. CryptoPunks were kind of the bottom for a long, long time. I believe one of the quotes is there was only 1,000 community members until the beginning of 2021, until that's where it really took off. When can you place, was the first time you saw a CryptoPunk as a PFP on Twitter, or can you pinpoint a time where the PFP narrative was spun up and started gaining some momentum within the NFT community at the time?
That's a great question, because PFP, like in the lexicon, was barely being used when the unofficial punks and the unofficial punk community started adding these derivative collections to the marketplace. They were being called social identity NFTs, which is a lot to chew on. Like, you know, it feels like you when you say that, there's like marbles in your mouth because it's a long fucking word. And so, I mean, punks were being used as PFPs, you know, as avatars, right? Like that's the most common way that we understood the Twitter, you know, the Twitter circle was it was an avatar. That was your avatar, not a PFP. And so they were being used for as long as I've been in the space, and maybe even earlier since they came about. I could think of what's his name? I can't think of it now. But they were around. It was a flex. It was a flex that you at the time it was like, oh, the flex was, oh, I got my punk for free, right? And so the owners of those would flex by putting it in their profile picture or in their avatar. And that community was really interesting because it gave you access to a Discord that was really like, I would consider it the first alpha group. You know, it's where hash masks were discovered. You know, that's how hash masks really originally gained their momentum, was because this community of influencers, this, you know, people who had been in the know since 2017 when they dropped, and owned 200 of them or 100 of them, you know, or 50 of them or whatever it was. You know, so I think to answer your question, let's backtrack this. So in 2019 and 2020, they definitely existed as avatars. After apes, and that's really a significant timeline for a lot of people, because that also coincides. April of 21 also coincides with the bull market for NFTs. Like it starts to shift heavily at that point, and so the PFP narrative begins to gain momentum away from social identity NFTs, which was the term we were using very briefly at the time to describe what was happening here. But that's essentially what they are, right? You're using a project that you believe in as your social identity. And apes really, like, with the growth of the community, you started to see sort of the ape first punk space, and you had the OGs and the punks, and these new punk kids coming in from, you know, crypto Twitter, buying apes and then flexing as apes begins to shift more towards a more valuable asset, right? Because what apes does really well over time is grow a community where Lava Labs did everything they could in their power to fuck that up. They just weren't, and it's not. I don't mean to, like, I'm not saying Matt and John didn't want something better. It's just they weren't equipped for it. They're creators of really amazing art-based projects and experiments with technology. They're not community builders, right? The Yuga Labs team was built on the idea of building a community, so they had an advantage as soon as the bull market shifts. So I think, to answer your question, PFP really becomes a natural part of the crypto Twitter lexicon in like June of 2021.
It's really important to tie that narrative down and tie that timeline. Of course, timelines always change, and it's important to be aware that, especially in the NFT archaeology community, as these new projects become uncovered, the timeline continually changes, and this is where a lot of those philosophical reinforcements come in, where people are putting hard line in the sand, whether it takes credibility or value away from their project. And that's a whole nother hour, 2 hour long conversation. Sure. We could dive in at some point. It's
I mean, that's human nature though, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's what we do, is we argue about the semantics of time and language.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this before we dive into Synthesis, which I believe is the project that it's like a PFP project that you launched after All Pugs. What is your opinion on this NFT archaeology, NFT historian movement that was born when the rediscovery of mooncats happened, and there was this like whole proliferation of, holy crap, there's so many NFT collections that were abandoned, or maybe there's some sort of historical significance that lies there in the past. This is a massive gold rush to find the Picassos and the Aztec pottery that's stored somewhere down deep in the blockchain history. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's, oh man, this is such a hard question. Only because I have so much respect for the people who are doing this work. Mm-hmm. But art, and this is such like a personal opinion. So I'll just start it with that. But archaeologist, like, I get it's a descriptive term, but a lot of these projects are 6 years old. I mean, you know, it doesn't feel like ancient history to me. Mm-hmm. You know, so that's just a semantic thing for me. I mean, it's stuck. It's here. We're there. So that's fine. What do I think about it? I think they're doing amazing work to like highlight all these early projects. And I was the beneficiary of one of those highlights when Leonidas spent 60 or 80 ETH to buy the floor on Crypto Skulls, something I had been collecting since the very beginning, purely because of the aesthetic. You know, I loved skulls. They were 8-bit skulls. It was totally cool. Like, why would I not want to buy these things? You know, and I got my first one for free. Like, you know, it was very like, it was my CryptoPunks moment, because I had missed the 2017 free one. But I think they're doing important work highlighting some of the early innovators in the space. You know, like when the Twitter egg profile eggs came about from, was it Namecoin, right? Mm-hmm. That was cool. This recent discovery of the first contract on Ethereum that acts similar to the ENS by, I forget the dude's name,
Lanaji.
Yeah. And like, you know, that's really amazing. It's important to catalog history. I do this. This is why people have called me a trash art historian. I catalog the history of it, because if we don't, the stories get missed and the narratives get changed over time. The benefit we have about the blockchain itself is that the blockchain can't lie. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're the earliest, and what I mean by this is, if you're the earliest contract on the Ethereum blockchain, it can be verified. Like, this is, I think, different than any time in archaeological or art historian history. We could track it back to a very specific time and date without carbon dating, right? But a lot of this is similar to the debate of like, in my mind, artifact versus art. The art market as we know it today, and art history as we know it today, really begins in like the 13th and 14th century, I would say. And really at the time, maybe even a little bit later with Gutenberg's printing press, and the way that the church started to use artists to create imagery as a way to sell the history of the church, right? But really, before this, we're talking about artifact history. And I think that's where we're at a little bit with the historical NFT space. It's like, what's artifact and what's art, right? And I think the NFT archaeologists are hunting these artifacts down and sort of cataloging its history. And I think it's really important work.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Art versus artifact. I'm probably gonna have to borrow that for some sort of Twitter thread in the near future. That's a very.
I didn't make it up.
it's a very important distinction, and you know, NFT archaeology gets Get some hate because, again, it clashes with narratives, and then also determining all of these semantical debates, right? Is it a token? Is expiry a token? Is it crypto art? Where does the value derive from? Is the value derived from the token or the IPFS hash that links to the image, right? There's all these different nuances to it, which right now,
it defines its historical value, right?
Like right. It's because cultural significance versus historical significance versus timestamp versus was there innovation? Was there a community? There's so many ways that people ascribe value to something. And I learned this when I owned an antique store in real life for 2 years, and I'd get a ton of people who would come in and find very unique things like 1950s kitchen utensils, very valuable. And to me, I'm like, I just bought this at a yard sale for $3, and this person wants to buy it for $50 because they want to complete some sort of collection that they have, or it reminds them of something. So we get lost now in a lot of these like heated debates, but I think, 5-10 years from now, a lot of this that we're having very heated debates and creating a lot of animosity, we'll be glad that we had these debates now, because we'll be laughing at it 5 to 10 years from now.
Well, certainly. And these debates help define how we talk about these things in the future. Mm-hmm. They're important. The debates are important to have. The debate about, what is art is still raging, right? The debate about, the debate about, is it like, what adds value to art? Is it the brand of the artist? Is it when it was created? Is it why it was created? And the answer, and you kind of highlighted this with the NFT archaeology sort of key points. It's all of it and none of it, right? For some, it's all of it. For some, it's pieces of it. For some, it's none of it. It's other things that will add value to it. The person who created it. What if I forgot the dude's name again? Linaji. Yeah,
he's the one that deployed it.
Yeah. What if that's Vitalik? Right? Do we even know who this, or what? Hypothetically, I don't know this. What if it's a female developer? Holy shit, that would add more value to it, right? In some circles, or maybe less value in others because they disrespect women. I don't know, but over time, as we have discovery, over time, as we create the narratives and have these semantic discussions and definitions, we shape how we talk about it in the future. Yeah, PFP is a perfect example.
The idea that if Linaji was a female developer who deployed this, I think that narrative right now of a lot of the hate that's thrown that way would completely 180, and you would have pretty unified support too. I didn't even think of that. It's cool to have those kind of thought ideas, which, you hope for it. You don't really know for sure, but that's something that completely shift a narrative on its head and have people completely think about different things, because not only is it the first NFT contract, but it's also is deployed by a female, where females are underrepresented wholly across every sector of crypto.
Tech in general. Well, it's not entirely true. Not crypto, but in tech, what I've seen is in the engineering space, it tends to be more male centric. In HR, marketing departments tends to be more female. Sales tend to be more male. But to that point, anyway, that's like diving into stupid numbers that I don't really have.
So here, tell me about tell me about Synthesis. This is the project that you deployed right after alt punk. So you had a few pieces of artwork out there on Super Rare. You have the alt punks, and then Synthesis comes next.
Yeah, so it's actually, I call it Synthesis.
Oh, Synthesis. Okay.
Yeah. So the SIN is social identity NFTs.
Ah, there we go.
Right. And right. And it was essentially my testimony or my thesis on the proliferation of I mean, I don't know that we were calling them PFPs at the time, like all, specifically, but maybe this is around the time that it is, July, right? So June is when that PFP discussion starts to shift from avatar to very briefly social identity NFTs to PFP. And this was created in response to that. And so at the time, I saw a lot of people clamoring to flex, right? They were flexing with their PFPs about what they were buying. We see it today too, but at the time it was new. This behavior of flexing a PFP with a new project like the Apes was new. And this is July 2021, so Apes is 2 months old. I passed on them because I thought the art was garbage. And, and I say that meaning like it didn't attract, I wasn't attracted to it. So at the time, I had the mindset of I will only buy things that I like. I wasn't thinking I will buy things and like the Degans coming from crypto Twitter. I mean, and the degens coming from crypto Twitter. They're coming in and seeing rarity. They're coming in and seeing this is a digital asset. In my mind, it was all art. So I was like, I don't like the art. I thought the cartoon was campy. Like, why am I going to buy a cartoon ape? And then I was like, fuck that. So I don't do it. But I was getting sort of like drawn into like, I can't believe people are like really into flexing about what they're buying. This is kind of like new, right? Like it's like somebody at scale, a whole community showing their Lambos every day as they're driving them. Which kind of happens now, but the reason this was created was twofold. It was in response to that, in response to my visceral reaction to people flexing about PFPs, and my response as an artist to say, you know what, I don't need to flex using somebody else's project. I could fucking make my own because I'm an artist. Like for me, that was the flex. And so I decided to do that here. And the way I did it was this was created in the exact opposite way you think of PFPs today. The face itself is the same face throughout the entire project. The rarity is based on the number of heads being used as opposed to one. We see one head in PFP projects. It emotes not based on what items or what facial structure it has, but based on the colors and the background. So like I tried to think of how can I create the anti-PFP, the anti-generative PFP, and each one of these are hand generated by me. Every element this is not auto-generated. There's only 100 of them.
Wow, that's a lot. It's a lot of effort because the standard is like the 8 trait rarity. Take those traits, put them and jumble them up and spit something out. So 120 items for this one. The alt punks were 99, but the fact that you had to hand do this shows that there was a lot of effort that went into this.
Yeah, alt punks also hand generated, hand created. Mm-hmm. So like for me, it was, as an artist, it's my job to, I consider myself a bit of an explorer, and I'm doing it for me. Like, yeah, I want people to buy my stuff. It's how I survive and make a living, but I'm doing a lot of the exploration for myself. Sometimes I comment with words, and I've been known to be abrasive in the space with my words. And sometimes I comment with my images. The alt punks was commentary as an artwork. The Unofficial punks was commentary as artwork. So is synthesis. And it's how for me, I add value to my world and to the space doing it that way. And also writing articles, right? Like I'm just trying to just be a good citizen and share my perspective. And that's one way I do it.
And today you have your own podcast, which you've interviewed some very, very prestigious people. You've had Robness on, I saw a few times. Mm-hmm. You've had Flux Research, and I'll hit more episodes here so we could kind of see this. And you talk about a handful of different interesting topics about abstract art, holistic education, schooling, art curation, right? Like Martin Lucas was one of the early people. Brian Brinkman's a popular artist.
Yep.
As you progressed into your NFT journey, we've seen it evolve from trash art to, you know, the, what was it? The MILF NFT thirst trap provocateur, right? To a handful of different collections,
That's right.
to the one of one art. Now it seems like the podcast is something that you do once a week and post to it. What spurred the idea to create a podcast? And if you could name out a few of like the objectives and things that you'd like to accomplish through this podcast.
Yeah, so I've started and stopped the podcast over time, trying to find the right format that works for me. I'm restarting it up again after a little bit of a brief break. The objective is quite simple. At the time, there weren't many NFT podcasts out there, not as many as there are today. And what I saw with each of them was this idea that they started with, so how did you get your start in NFTs? And seem to completely ignore everything that happened with that person prior to that time period. I was really more interested, and that's why they're so long. And that's, you know, usually an hour and even longer, because I'm interested in getting to know the person. It's selfishly an opportunity for me to talk to people, especially as we, you know, this is like it's a global space, and so I can't be in the same time zone as everybody. So it's an opportunity to talk to some really unique people and make some new friends, but also an opportunity to highlight artists some of my favorite artists who may not get an opportunity to be a participant in other podcasts. You know, I reached out to you, right? How many artists are reaching out to you?
Mm-hmm. It's true. I've had to message them 95% of them.
Correct. Yeah. And so this is like one of the things I try to give back to the community. For me, I mean, you know, yeah, I'm giving back for them, but it makes me feel good. Like I'm taking from the community, and that they buy my artwork or they buy my assets. But then I also feel it's important for me to give back in a way that's natural to me. And the way that I do that is, you know, things like this. I can take my time to introduce other people to the space. But the reason I asked you that question is because so many artists, and then if you're an artist and you're listening, this is the one piece of advice I need you to listen to. You need to be proactive about your career if you intend to make money about it. You need to put the effort in and reach out to people. Waiting for them to come to you is not going to happen. Waiting for sales is not going to happen. The idea that you're going to be discovered on a corner in Paris, you know, is like this model that doesn't exist. Very few people, Ferocious is like the only one I could think of, who came into the space with very little following, and it was fucking meteoric. Because of story, right? He came in and was telling his story right from the beginning. Just putting your art on Twitter is not going to do it. You've got to be proactive. And so one of the ways that I'm proactive is I reached out to you. I reached out to other people. I reached out to other podcasts. I get no response. That's okay. You know, it's like, it's important to me to continue to grow. And the way we do that is take action. One of my favorite quotes, and I'll stop this little tirade real quick. But one of my favorite quotes is, the great aim of education is not knowledge, but action. And most people, I think, like, they learn something and then they say they've learned it and maybe they've internalized it, but have you put it to use? Like, that's the missing ingredient. So fucking take action. Like, you know, there's no wrong step. The only wrong step is no step.
I probably send out 3 to 4 podcast requests per week and maybe get a response to 1 or 2. But to me, it's very similar with the podcast. Is I'm selling my art just as much as an NFT artist is putting their artwork up on NFT, right? It's a podcast is social investing. You're decorating space and time with words, and you're building a relationship that also then leads to more opportunities down the road, right? Just like as somebody who collects your NFT art, just because it's in their wallet of a prestigious artist, then other people are more likely to find you because, you know, a valued collector has found your artwork to be very valuable. So then it's like the gift that keeps on giving. And
you know, like people shit on Gary V because he says he puts a lot of words out there, but I've always admired him. You know, all of his words don't resonate with me, but if you key in to what he does, you can implement that as an artist or a creator into your world. You know, you can literally, here's a very specific example. We're having this podcast, we're having this discussion here, this interview. From this, I could chop it up and create sound bites of my talking points and share them on my socials. If that's really, you could do the same, right? That's really important. That's how you turn a piece of content into additional assets. Like, I think a lot of people think you have to create new content. But what Gary does really well is how does he take one piece of content and create 100 items from that one piece of content?
Yeah.
Like, that's the missing ingredient for most people.
Just need like 3 or 4 video editors on demand to get it done.
I mean, yeah, you can't do it too. I mean, like, let's be serious. He has a videographer following him 24/7, and he has a team that does everything. But you could take that concept, and if you take one video and did 10 assets a week from that one interview you did as an artist, you're ahead of the game more than 99% of other artists in the space.
Yeah, content comes in many various forms, and it's not for a long time. I always thought that physical decoration was art and nothing else was. Then I learned through conversation that you can have intellectual artwork through conversations. And then once you get into content, you realize that there's video content, there's pictorial content, there's audio content. There's so many various forms to it. And to this day, I think that starting a podcast is probably the best decision I've ever done, even more so than investing in crypto in 2017 and profiting, because of all of the knowledge that I've gained. I've done about 240 episodes now, and
that's amazing.
I would not be here today without being able to take those bits and pieces of knowledge from every single person and then applying it down the road to then get into the position that we get to have this kind of conversation today. You get to climb the social hierarchy, you get to learn. And to me, it's almost like a cheat code, right? Before I had a podcast, I would message people. You try to have a short conversation with them. You don't get any sort of credence from them because, you know, you're a nobody, but you say, hey, do you want to share your story on my podcast? Because then they see that they could cut the content up to 10, 20 different pieces. And for them, it's more exposure. And 9 times out of 10, as long as they see the message, they'll probably say yes. And then they'll say, how much time do you need?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's really, to your point about anything can be art. It wasn't until I saw, like, Seth Godin has been earlier in my career, I was in marketing, and he was a distance mentor. You know what I mean by that? Like, somebody I've never met, but all of his books were like guiding me and helping me learn. So he wrote this one time that art is anything that is fuck, I'm going to butcher this, but basically art is anything that the person creating it puts effort into, and that it resonates with a viewer. So I always loved that, because growing up, I went to art school, I went to art class, and that had a very specific context. But truly, in my professional career, I've been able to turn, like, the mental model of what art is into a much broader vision, and you get to share your art. In this case, this podcast, right? You get to share your art with the world. The effort and time and energy you put into this, so important. So
and through my own entrepreneurial journey, I've had a few different business attempts. I realized that entrepreneurship is a very large form of artwork, right? You're taking you're taking your intelligence, your experience, and some sort of your aesthetic beliefs, and you're applying it to a business, and you're selling somebody a product just as somebody you sell somebody some art, and they get to experience it because you're the person who basically molded that sculpture and then was able to spit out an item. Whether it's profitable or successful or not is to be determined, but it's just the same as somebody who creates an artwork piece of a physical piece of art and it doesn't sell. It's still something that they created through their own experience and through their own hands.
Yeah, I think for some, like entrepreneurship is like this mystery, and there's really no mystery to it, in my opinion. It's like putting things into action. Now, you go back to taking action. You know, where an entrepreneur, I think, what an entrepreneur does better than anybody else is learning from their failures, you know, and risking failure, super important. Like there's I don't remember who said this, but like failing small, fail fast, fail often, right? Turning failure into, like, I grew up where failure was not an option. Like if you failed, it was like some fucking, culturally, like failure was looked at as something that was bad to do, right? You get good grades in school, you go to college, you get, and then if you don't follow that path, it's a failure, right? But if you accept that failure is just another human activity, another way to live in the world, then you don't have to fear it. You sort of just grow from it. And then a failure becomes an experiment. An experiment takes 30 days or 10 days. But you start to like devolve from what you believe failure is and experiment with that. Design thinking is all about failure. It's like taking this approach, creating 3 or 4 things you're going to attempt, and then iterating and evolving them as they're going. What works, what doesn't work, why? Like, what's the data? Like, you learn to sort of like see failure as like an opportunity to experiment and move forward.
Yeah, one of my favorite modern day philosophers, Scott Adams, who wrote Dilbert, he introduced this idea when I was younger called skill stacking, which is like you're gonna have a lot of failures, but as long as you can pull unique skills from it and then apply it and stack it together and then leverage that to whatever your future endeavors are, that's what's gonna find success. So yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. Before we get out of here, one final question so we could bring it all the way full circle. NFT art history. Underappreciated. I could tell through this conversation, you're taking a lot of attempts to document it. What do us as a community, overall historical NFT community, for the artists and the collections, what do you think we could do better? And how do we make sure that we get all of the stories documented?
Well, one of the issues with NFT art history specifically is the number of artists. Right? It's a little bit different than identifying a collection. So I think that's going to be a debate. How do you catalog all the artists and creators from 2019 and 2020? The benefit here is blockchain, right? So we can identify what artists were around in 2020 and 2019. So if we start at 2019, which I think is really a good time to start and then go back, you're looking at a much smaller pool. Would it be cool to have like every artist on the blockchain, whatever that means, right? But here we go. What is an artist? Is it somebody who minted one thing on the blockchain? Is it somebody, is Leonidas an artist if he minted something? I don't know. I wouldn't debate that. I would say anybody that minted anything on the chain and sold it as art is an artist, but maybe somebody would want, well, it's a minimum collection of 500 pieces or, I don't know. Doesn't matter. I think this will be debated. I think what we can do better is sort of highlight the artists that did stay around. Maybe not, those that have fought the attrition and attempted to remain relevant. There's many of us out there, and we could certainly use more
exposure.
More exposure, yeah. I mean, an artist only has exposure to lean on, in terms of like awareness.
he shed exposure on the artist that fought attrition. That's going to be the headline for this podcast. So, Eric,
Cool.
thank you for this conversation. It's really reinvigorating finding somebody who appreciates history of NFTs. Maybe we're on one side's the collection, one side's the art, but we're trying to unify that together, and kind of add a lot of credence to the stories, because as we know, the story behind the art, the story behind the history, the story behind the token is what's going to give it value long-term over time. So I appreciate your work, and we're definitely gonna have to come back for round 2 to continue the end of that conversation.
Anytime.